Hey YouTube, let's talk about virtue signaling. These are two words which are fairly easy to understand at first glance, right? You are signaling a virtue. The virtue being something virtuous or good, and the signal being directed back at yourself. In other words, when someone accuses you of virtue signaling, what they're accusing you of is telling everyone around you, look how good I am. I understand the right ideology or the right response to give in this moment, to project to the world, even if I don't personally believe in that thing. And so at the beginning, it seems like, 30-second explanation, virtue signaling, that's done. But I think it's worth taking a few minutes to actually reflect on what this term means and why we're seeing it thrown around so much recently. You know, in the social media age that we're living in, where we're interacting with our friends and our strangers and everyone around us in society more and more through bite-sized messages. The distinction between what's real and what's manufactured is getting a bit blurry. It's hard sometimes to tell when someone does a post on their Instagram feed about George Floyd, or they do a all-black square to represent Black Lives Matter, to stand in solidarity with a movement which is of crucial importance to people of one specific race and one specific historical context. Now, you would think people from different races and different contexts standing side by side with them is what people want. And of course it is. But the problem is there's a big difference between actually marching with someone and actually taking the time to understand their perspective and learn from their perspective and educate yourself versus just spending 5 seconds, finding some black square somewhere, putting that on Instagram to your followers, and then saying something about, rest in peace, George Floyd. Now that could be accused of virtue signaling. But is it? Do you know if that person with that black square has actually educated themselves? Or have you, the accusation of virtue signaling is very easy to make. Just like that square is easy to put up. It's also very easy to cast your own opinions on what that square means. And so we've come to this space in social media where it's like nobody trusts anything anymore. Just like we don't trust the news, just like we don't trust our politicians, frankly, look at all the misinformation that we're hearing around the pandemic. Nobody trusts anything anymore. And that same level of distrust and skepticism we're applying to the virtues being shared by, even our own friends. So this is problematic, I would say, for a few reasons. And the first reason is when people accuse someone else of virtue signaling, if you want to get kind of meta about it, you're also signaling your virtue. You're saying I am somehow smarter and I see through this facade. I see through this illusion of what you're doing. You think you're making a difference with your black square, but I'm the person who noticed the virtue signaling and I'm going to comment about it. I'm not just going to think it. I'm going to tell everyone else how you are virtue signaling, which is simultaneously virtue signaling the fact that you think you're smarter than everyone else. But okay, that's a bit of a side tangent, but I think it's worth reflecting on how pointing out virtue signaling can also be virtue signaling. And if the person who wrote that comment said, no, that actually wasn't my intent at all, I wasn't signaling anything, I was just voicing a thought that mattered to me, then the other person who did the black square could say, so was I. And then you have sort of a stalemate moment between the two people because no one actually knows someone else's intentions. And that's why I think it is, I'm not saying it's always bad to accuse people of virtue signaling. I'm not saying the concept should disappear because frankly, there are people who are doing clear examples of virtue signaling. Or let's speak about corporations, because I think that's an even more clear example. When you have corporations who are not hiring diverse people in their organizations or have long histories that are like, not too woke, but actually like pretty counter to progressive movements. I'm talking about organizations that, might have, might have bad histories regarding gay people or minorities or women or, some of these corporations like Versailles, like who was it who made the uniforms for the Nazi Party in Germany? Yeah, who was it? Hugo Boss. Yes, Hugo Boss. Someone who still puts boss on everyone's shirts. They were doing that for the good old Nazi Party back in the 30s and 40s. If you spend enough time on social media and think about it through that critical lens, you're going to see all these companies doing it. Whether it's Black History Month, whether it's the LGBT month, it's just like a laundry list of like, oh, okay, what week is it today? Let's pretend to care about this. Okay, and then on Tuesday we're going to pretend about care about this. And then next Thursday, oh, we got to care about this. It's virtue signaling. It's someone who is sending a PR message out to the world and saying, don't get angry at us, we're saying all the right things. But they're not actually reflecting on what that means. And, the reason I am making this video is because I think it's worth asking ourselves that question sometimes. Like, am I virtue signaling? When other people ask it, normally they don't ask it. Normally people just accuse someone else of doing it. I would say that's a bit cynical and pessimistic and often inflammatory. Like often it's just trolls who are like, will see something that's covering a social issue and they'll say, that's virtue signaling. But in a sense, that's just them saying, I don't like hearing about this. I don't want to hear about this. I don't want to hear about rights for women on my Twitter feed. So I'm going to call it virtue signaling. I don't want to hear a man claim to be a feminist. So I'm going to accuse him of virtue signaling so I can shut him down. So I can stop this movement. So I can, be an internet troll, I guess. But when you're talking about yourself, like we talked about it earlier, how intentions are what really matter, and having your actions aligned with your words and your beliefs aligned with your messaging. So the only person who really knows if you're truly virtue signaling is yourself upon doing self-reflection, which not enough people do. Now, to use another example, which is closer to home, I'm Canadian, and we just passed the first ever day of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is a day to acknowledge and remember a lot of atrocities which took place in this country against our Indigenous populations. And I made a video about the Indigenous event earlier this week in Canada, just sharing some thoughts on it to try and, I don't know if educate's the right word, but just to try and share some light and truth about this day for people who might not know a lot about it. I have some viewers who aren't Canadian. I just wanted to speak. I just felt something I wanted to speak about it because it's an important part of Canada that I don't think gets enough attention. And then I had an interesting comment on that video relating to virtue signaling. Somebody left a comment, Jeremy Andrews left a comment saying, "Hi Dan, it's good to see that nobody flamed you for talking about this subject or had some arrogant, pissy comment about the day being fake and contrived. I also shared on the day on my social media threads and got slammed by trolls. I had to take down my participation attempts. I had hoped people were going to treat you respectfully, and they have. Kudos to you, Dan." Yeah, so what he's getting at is people accused the day of being fake and contrived. So they essentially accused it of being a day of virtue signaling. So much so that Jeremy felt compelled to delete his posts. And that's the very insidious side of virtue signaling. You might think that you're being so clever when you claim people are virtue signaling, and I realize I just kind of claim some companies are virtue signaling as well. But I think especially when you're talking about individuals, when you're talking about a black square, or you're talking about attending an event, or you're talking about just sharing an opinion, there's a lot of people who don't do that because they're afraid of the accusation that they're virtue signaling, or they just don't know how to feel about something, man. Like, there's a lot of people in this world who are busy working jobs. Maybe they don't have all the time to check out all the news, but they're compassionate people. They want to do the right thing. And if they can do a post in solidarity with an event, they'll do it. But once they get all these people saying, oh, you're so fake, you don't know what you're talking about, maybe just they don't want that negativity in their life, so they'll delete it, or they won't do that next time. So in a sense, like, you are censoring people by accusing them of that, by calling out virtue signaling without any depth to, or any rationale for what you're really saying. You are silencing people. And so, I feel that social pressure too sometimes. Like, frankly, making that video was weird because I'm not an Indigenous Canadian. I was like, is this really my space to speak? I had a bit of self-censorship going on in my head. I was like, am I virtue signaling? Am I? And maybe some people think I was. Maybe they didn't leave the comments or whatever. Maybe some people just thought that and like skipped the video and they didn't even watch. I definitely ask myself that question sometimes. I think it's important to reflect upon. But if the answer you come to is no, then do whatever the hell you want. And to the Jeremys out there, like, I know it's hard when people are sharing negativity. I feel it too. But I think the best way to live your life, as much as possible, is to not worry about the opinions of others, as long as you're sure of what you want to say. And the accusation of virtue signaling it's just, I'm not sure it's helpful. And frankly, I'm not even sure I should have called out those companies earlier in this video. I apologize to Disney and even Hugo Boss. You put outfits on the Nazis, but maybe I don't know. Maybe they made some huge donation to the German people to. Well, frankly, it should be to the Jewish people, but maybe they did something to amends for that at some point in their history, and I don't know. I just read some fact on Wikipedia, and now I make these snarky comments about Hugo Boss and Disney, and I'm like, hey, look at me. Is that virtue signaling? Was I virtue? And that's the thing about virtue signaling too. It's like, it's turtles all the way down. It's like you can never stop overthinking about it. Like, I got a camera in the background. Am I virtue signaling that I'm a good photographer? Am I showing you, hey, check out this signal? There's some artwork over there. Am I virtue signaling that I'm really into artwork? I'm really into Montreal. I'm really into some random pile of sticks that I should probably get rid of. But you're safe for now, sticks. But your time could be coming soon. The point is, everything we do is a signal. Everything we do is signaling what we believe in. And you could say underneath that signal there's fakeness, but like today I wore a shirt. I'm not wearing a suit and tie. So maybe I'm virtue signaling to you that I'm a casual guy. I'm just like you. Maybe if I wore a suit, I'd be signaling, look at me, I'm successful. You should listen to me because I have all the answers. Maybe if I had some punk torn shirt on, I'd be like signaling like, hey, I'm a bit counterculture, my hair's all black and stuff. Those are all signals. But that doesn't mean everyone in the world is a faker. Like, I think a lot of young, immature teenagers go through that period where they're like, man, everyone's a phony. I'm the only real one out there. And people throwing around these virtue signaling accusations. You're like those teenagers who never grew up. You're like the ones who think you're so clever because you see through everyone. But have you seen through yourself yet? Have you seen the irony of your own position? That's what I wonder about these people throwing stones at others on the internet. But hey, that's my little ramble about virtue signaling. We could go on this topic. I'm not here to even tell you that virtue signaling is entirely good or entirely bad. Frankly, like there is virtue signaling in the world. So I don't want to just leave you with the conclusion that you should never accuse anyone of that. It's just that with bold claims comes bold responsibility, right? Like if you're going to tell someone that their beliefs are empty, there's nothing behind it, you should have some evidence for that. So that's my virtue signaling video on virtue signaling about people who virtue signal about... You see how it goes? There's no end. There's no end to this stuff. All right. Hope you enjoyed this one. See you next time.